Camila had always believed love was a luxury she couldn't afford, something for people who didn't worry about unpaid rent or second jobs that chewed through her weekends. She lived in a cramped, damp apartment whose walls peeled like old secrets. Every morning she stood in a freezing shower rehearsing the lies she'd tell her landlord, her boss, herself. She told people she was strong because asking for help felt like drowning in shame. And she hated the pity in their eyes more than the poverty itself. The city was a slab of concrete that never softened, never cared. It was all steel, neon, and exhaustion. She moved through it with a clenched jaw and tired eyes. When the bank notice came, threatening to swallow what little she owned, her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. She read the letter over and over at her kitchen table, the words blurring with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Past due. Final warning. It felt like an execution order signed in cheap ink. Camila wasn't the type to cry for help, but she found herself standing in the lobby of the bank the next morning, hands shaking, breath hitching. The line moved too slowly, and she rehearsed her appeal, each version worse than the last. When her number was called, she wanted to run, but she didn't. She sat across from a smirking clerk who clicked his pen like a metronome of doom. "Your options are limited," he said without looking at her. She felt her fingernails dig into her palms. Her pride bled. That's when she heard a voice, calm, assured, terrifying in its indifference. "Perhaps there's another way." She turned, startled, to see Rafael Montero standing behind her like a verdict. He looked so at ease in this glass prison of wealth, suited in charcoal wool, tie loosened just enough to suggest he owned the whole building. He was beautiful in a brutal way, with cold eyes that judged everything and found it wanting. His voice was a dark, lazy drawl, the sound of someone who never begged for anything. Camila's first instinct was to bristle, to tell him to mind his own damn business. But she was too desperate, too trapped. His gaze pinned her like an insect. He didn't even sit when the clerk stammered his name in fear. Raphael simply said, "Leave us." The clerk scrambled away. Camila felt her skin crawl under the weight of that power. She tried to speak, but only managed to whisper, "Who the hell are you?" His lips quirked. "Someone who can help." She hated him instantly for that smirk, for the way he looked at her, as if he already owned her. He listened as she explained her debt, didn't flinch when she broke halfway through, tears biting at her lashes. His eyes never softened. When she was done, silence fell between them, heavy as concrete. She realized he was waiting for her to ask. And she did. "Please," she whispered, the word like poison in her mouth. He smiled, not kindly, but satisfied. He laid out the terms with the casual cruelty of a man who liked watching people squirm. "I'll pay it. All of it. But you'll work for me. My rules. My conditions." Her breath caught. She should have said no, should have walked out and let the world bury her. But she was too tired, too lost. She nodded, hating herself. Raphael reached for his phone without another word, making the call that would erase her debt as easily as flicking lint from his suit. When he hung up, he looked at her like a cat toying with a mouse. "Congratulations. You're mine now." He had her move that same day, packed up her pathetic belongings, 3 boxes, all she owned, and installed her in a penthouse that smelled of money and loneliness. The windows were floor-to-ceiling glass, giving her a view of the city she hated. She couldn't sleep the first night. The sheets were too soft, the silence too loud. She walked from room to room like a ghost haunting someone else's dream. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger in borrowed clothes. She wanted to scream. Instead, she pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the cars crawl below like ants. She'd sold herself for security, and she couldn't even hate him for it. She hated herself more. The next morning he arrived unannounced, his presence swallowing the space. He didn't bother with greetings, just gave her a schedule typed in neat black letters. Meetings, tasks, dress codes, expectations. She snatched the paper from his hand, crumpled it, and threw it at his chest. He didn't flinch, just watched her with cold amusement. "Done?" he asked. She wanted to slap him. Instead, she turned away, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. He didn't move, didn't comfort her. The air between them vibrated with hostility and something darker, heavier. She realized he liked it when she fought. It was a game to him, and she had no choice but to play. In the office, he was even worse. He barked orders in that low, measured voice that promised consequences. She shot them back with venom, her words sharp enough to draw blood. She challenged him in meetings, corrected his staff in front of him. He never raised his voice, never lost control, but his eyes burned. Everyone noticed. Gossip spread like wildfire through marble hallways that the ice-cold magnate and his new assistant were at war. People stared when she walked by. Some pitied her. Others envied her. She hated all of them. She hated him most of all for making her the center of a spectacle she never wanted. Yet there was something in his gaze that wasn't just anger. It was hunger. Raw, unapologetic, terrifying. She caught him watching her once while she bent over a file, his eyes tracing the curve of her back with predatory focus. When she straightened, heart pounding, he didn't look away, didn't pretend. Her voice cracked with fury when she hissed, "Stop looking at me like that." He only raised an eyebrow. Like what? She turned on her heel before he could see her blush. In the elevator that night, she cursed herself for the thrill that skittered through her veins. She wasn't supposed to want him. He was supposed to be her enemy. But there were moments, awful, confusing moments, when he was gentle in ways that hurt more than any cruelty. Once, she fell asleep over spreadsheets, the numbers swimming after 14 hours without rest. She woke to find a blanket over her shoulders, the room dark except for the desk lamp. He sat across from her, fingers steepled, watching her wake. "You're no use to me dead," he said quietly. She wanted to throw the blanket at him, scream that he didn't get to be kind. But her voice broke. He stood then, straightened his jacket, and left without another word. She cried for the first time in months, silent tears soaking the pages. He controlled everything. Her hours, her tasks, even what she wore. One morning she found a dress laid out in her closet with a note, "Meeting at 9. Wear this." She ripped the note in half, tossed the dress on the floor, and wore her old slacks instead. At the meeting he barely looked at her, but the tension was thick enough to choke the entire room. When it ended, he called her into his office, shut the door with a quiet click that sounded like a threat. She didn't back down when he approached. "Don't ever tell me how to dress." His hand brushed her arm deliberately as he passed her. "You'll learn," he murmured. Her skin burned where he touched her, shame and something else knotting in her belly. Nights were worse. The penthouse was too silent, too polished. She wandered the halls barefoot, listening for ghosts. She couldn't call friends. She'd pushed them all away to hide the truth. Couldn't call her parents. They'd never understand why their stubborn daughter was living in a palace she hadn't earned. She spent hours staring at the city, imagining a different life. One where she hadn't begged. One where she hadn't sold herself. But sometimes, at 3 a.m., she thought about his eyes on her, the way they softened at the edges when he forgot himself. She hated herself for wanting to see it again. He began to test her in subtler ways, giving her impossible deadlines, only to watch her pull them off with spiteful brilliance, sending her to negotiate deals that would chew her alive if she faltered. She rose to every challenge, fueled by rage and desperation. Once she slammed a contract on his desk, so hard his coffee spilled. He only smirked, dabbing the stain with a napkin. "Congratulations. You've ruined my suit." She was panting with fury. He didn't look away. The silence felt like a held breath. Her heart thundered. She turned and stormed out before she could do something stupid, like kiss him or kill him. They spoke in barbs and poison, but the undercurrent was always there. She felt it when he stood too close behind her, reading over her shoulder, when his fingers brushed hers handing over papers. Once, late at night, she caught him waiting in the lobby for her. "I'll drive you," he said. She refused, voice shaking. He didn't argue, only watched as she fled to the subway. She sat on the dirty plastic seat, hugging herself, trying to erase the image of him standing under the marble lights looking lost. She wondered if he even knew he looked that way. She tried to make sense of him, failing every time. He was brutal in meetings, slicing competitors apart with words like knives. But she overheard him on the phone once, voice raw, talking to a sister who lived abroad, asking about her kids, laughing, sounding human. She didn't know what to do with that version of him. When she asked about it, he shut down completely. "Don't pry." She wanted to scream. He dragged her whole life into his control, but refused to let her see behind his own walls. The hypocrisy of it burned in her chest like acid. The staff noticed. Whispers followed her down halls. She heard her name coupled with his in hushed speculation. He never did this before. She must have something on him. He's obsessed. She tried to ignore it. But one afternoon she walked in on two assistants laughing at a meme of her on their phones, her face pasted onto a gold-digging cartoon. Rage and humiliation flooded her. She slapped the phone out of the girl's hand and nearly hit her. They reported her. Raphael called her into his office, face unreadable. What happened? She told him in one cold breath, refusing to cry. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, they're fired. She blinked, stunned. He didn't elaborate. But the punishment didn't end there. He was iced for days after that. No glances, no smirks, no subtle brushes of fingers. Just cold professionalism that felt worse than any insult. She found herself aching for his cruel attention, hating herself for it. When she finally snapped and shouted at him in the middle of a meeting, his lip twitched. The corner of his mouth curved. She felt her heart stutter. That night, he sent her a single line by email. "Come to my office." Now, she didn't go. She lay awake instead, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell he was doing to her. He refused to explain himself. Whenever she tried to demand an answer, "Why her? Why this arrangement?" he deflected. "You needed help. I provided it." She would slam her hands on his desk, eyes bright with fury. "What do you want from me?" He would just look at her with that infuriating calm. "Everything," he said once, so quietly she almost missed it. She left his office shaking. Outside, she pressed her back to the door, breath ragged, heart in revolt. She didn't know if she wanted to run away or run back in and demand he make good on it. There were nights she couldn't take it. Nights she went out, got drunk enough to forget him for a few hours. Once she came back at 2 a.m. and found him waiting in the lobby. He didn't say a word as he watched her stagger past. But the next day, there was a new rule in the contract: curfew at midnight. She laughed bitterly, tearing the paper to shreds. He just picked up the pieces calmly, eyes locked with hers. "This isn't a joke," he said softly. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to kiss him. Instead, she screamed until she was hoarse. He let her, but she never really left. She woke every morning in that gilded cage with its designer sheets and panoramic views, feeling the weight of his presence even when he wasn't there. She knew the city better now, could see the patterns in the traffic, the way the light hit the buildings at dawn. But she felt less free than ever. When they spoke, it was fire and ice, challenge and submission, and something so close to intimacy it made her sick. She didn't understand why he needed to own her to keep her close. She didn't understand why she stayed. But every time she thought about leaving, something in his eyes pulled her back, like gravity. Their days became an endless battle of wills, a brutal dance of provocation and retreat. She would enter his office with reports and spit the numbers at him like bullets. He'd raise an eyebrow, amused, correcting her with that infuriating calm. She'd throw the folder on his desk and storm out, only for him to call her back in seconds later. "You forgot something," he'd say softly, holding her gaze like a dare. The tension between them buzzed like an electric wire ready to snap. Neither would look away. Neither would give in. She hated him for it, but hated herself more for the thrill it sent through her veins. He demanded loyalty, obedience, but his gestures kept betraying him. Once, after she nearly collapsed from working 40 hours straight on a proposal, she woke to find a thermos of hot coffee and a note in his unmistakable scrawl: "Don't be an idiot. Eat something." She crushed the paper in her fist and wept in the bathroom, furious that even his kindness felt like control. Later, when she threw the note in his face, he didn't flinch. He only watched her, eyes shadowed. "You'll burn yourself out," he said quietly. She wanted to slap him for pretending to care. At times, he showed a tenderness that broke her open. She'd find him waiting for her in the lobby at midnight, leaning against the marble like he owned the world. He wouldn't speak, just take her bag, walk beside her to the elevator in silence. Once, when she fell asleep on the office couch, he covered her with his own jacket. She woke to find him sitting across the room, watching her like she was something priceless he didn't know how to hold. She pretended not to see the way his expression fell when she shoved the jacket back at him in the morning. But neither of them could keep it soft for long. The moment she tried to ask why he was doing this, he turned cruel. "Don't make this something it's not," he'd sneer. "You're here because you need me." She would stiffen, spine rigid. "I don't need you. I need the money." His smile was all teeth. Same thing. It would spiral from there. Accusations hurled like grenades, words meant to wound. Yet no matter how vicious it got, she'd always end up back at his side the next day, eyes red from crying but refusing to break. It got worse when she began digging into his past. She hadn't meant to. It started with a rumor in the break room about a failed marriage, a brother lost to suicide after a disastrous deal Raphael had closed. She couldn't help herself. She asked questions, found old news articles. When she finally confronted him, he went white as paper. His voice was dead when he said, "You had no right." She tried to explain, voice shaking, that she just wanted to understand. He cut her off with a laugh so bitter it scraped her soul. "Understand what? That I ruin everything I touch." He didn't speak to her for days after that. She kept coming to work, shoulders squared, ignoring the sideways glances of the staff who knew something had changed. The air between them was frigid. Once, she passed him in the hall, and he didn't even look at her. She felt her chest cave in with the loss. Nights were torture. She lay awake in that vast bed he'd given her, hating him for shutting her out, hating herself for missing him. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she wrote him a letter she'd never send. "I see you. I know you're not just this monster." When they finally spoke again, it was catastrophic. She burst into his office unannounced, shaking with fury. "You don't get to do this," she shouted. "You don't get to just shut me out." He looked up from his desk slowly, eyes empty. "Leave." She slammed her palms on the polished wood. "No. Fuck you. You want me here so badly? Then fucking talk to me." He stood so fast his chair toppled. "I'm not your fucking project," he roared. She didn't back down. "Then stop acting like you're broken beyond repair." The silence that followed was deafening. He crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her arms so hard she gasped. "Don't you dare pity me," he hissed, voice cracking. She tried to twist away, but his grip only tightened. Their faces were inches apart, breathing hard, rage and grief mingling in the space between them. She saw the flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, and it undid her. She surged forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was teeth and desperation, a battle of tongues that tasted like salt and tears. He kissed her back like a drowning man clinging to wreckage. They didn't make it to the bedroom. He lifted her onto his desk, scattering papers and pens to the floor. She wrapped her legs around him, clawing at his shirt. He pulled at her hair to bare her neck and bit down, marking her as his. She arched into him, cursing, moaning his name. It was frantic, raw, the culmination of months of denied need. When they came apart, bodies slick with sweat, he held her so tightly she could barely breathe. His lips brushed her ear in a confession she barely heard. "I don't know how to let you go." But he did try. The next morning he was gone before she woke. She found a note on her pillow in the same scrawl as always. "This was a mistake. Don't wait for me." Her heart cracked in her chest. She tore the note to pieces and flushed them down the hotel sink. When she arrived at work, her office was cleared out. A new contract sat on her old desk, termination of services. She stared at it for hours before signing it with a shaking hand. He didn't even say goodbye. She walked out of his building with her head high and her heart in ruins. Outside, the city seemed crueler than before. The wind sliced through her coat like it wasn't there. She had nowhere to go but a friend's couch, her apartment long since given up to pay debts. She sat in the subway, clutching her bag to her chest, replaying his words over and over. This was a mistake. She wanted to scream, to go back and slap him, to beg him to take it back. But she did none of it. Instead, she pressed her lips together until they bled, forcing herself to remember the way he'd looked at her that last night, like she was everything. Raphael, meanwhile, buried himself in work like a man possessed. He fired half his staff for imagined betrayals, closed deals with such ruthlessness that even his closest allies whispered about him in fear. The board threatened to oust him at one point, only for him to laugh in their faces and by controlling shares overnight. But behind closed doors he was a wreck. Whiskey bottles littered his penthouse. He stopped shaving. He stared at her number on his phone for hours at a time, thumb hovering over the call button. But he never pressed it. He didn't think he deserved the sound of her voice. He went out to clubs, trying to prove something to himself. Women flocked to him, beautiful, willing. He didn't touch them. He sat in VIP booths nursing expensive scotch, watching the dance floor through cold, dead eyes. Once, a model climbed onto his lap and tried to kiss him. He pushed her away so hard she fell. Security rushed in, but he just paid them off and left. Outside, he threw up in the gutter. He couldn't stop thinking about her hair tangled in his fingers, The way she'd looked at him like he was worth saving. He hated her for it. Camila tried to build a new routine. She took temp jobs, burned through savings. She avoided mutual friends so they wouldn't ask questions she couldn't answer. At night, she lay awake thinking about the sound of his voice, the cruel softness in it when he let himself be honest. She'd hated that he controlled her. But sometimes she missed it. Missed the certainty of knowing where she'd sleep, what she'd eat, that he was watching her back even when it infuriated her. It felt like a betrayal of everything she was to admit she missed being owned. They didn't speak for weeks. She imagined him forgetting her, replacing her. She wanted that, needed it. But every time she saw a man in a tailored suit, she'd catch her breath. Every time her phone buzzed, she hoped it was him. It never was. She told herself she was better off, that he was poison, that she'd finally escaped. But the truth was uglier. She felt hollow, empty, like he'd carved himself into her so deeply there was no removing him without tearing herself apart in the process. Meanwhile, Raphael worked later and later, avoiding his penthouse like it was haunted. Staff would find him passed out at his desk. He yelled at anyone who dared question him. But he couldn't forget the last thing he'd said to her. This was a mistake. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He hadn't meant them. Or worse, he had. Because wanting her meant giving up control. Meant letting himself be vulnerable. And he'd rather kill that part of himself than give her the power to hurt him again. She thought about calling him. Her finger would hover over his name in her contacts. She'd whisper curses at herself, crying, deleting the number only to re-add it a day later. She hated him for making her this. Hated herself more for wanting to hear him say her name. For wanting to hear his voice break just once the way hers did every time she remembered his hands on her. She told herself she was done. She lied. She waited for him anyway. One night she dreamed about him. About the way he'd held her after they'd fought, bodies bruised from the violence of their desire. About the way he'd rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I don't know how to let you go." She woke up sobbing, clutching her pillow so tight it tore at the seams. She missed him so much it made her physically sick. But even in her dreams, she remembered the way he'd looked at her that last day, cold, cutting her free. She didn't know which version was real. He found excuses to keep tabs on her. Quietly, anonymously. He paid an investigator to make sure she had work. He forced a landlord to approve her rental when she was about to be homeless. He hated himself for it, for not letting her go the way he'd sworn he would. He justified it as penance, as responsibility. But when the reports came back with photos of her leaving work looking exhausted, when he saw the bags under her eyes, he would shut himself in his office and drink until he couldn't see straight. They were both too proud to admit it, but they were breaking. Everyone around them saw it. Staff whispered about the madness of it all. Friends tried to intervene, only to be shut out. It was as if they existed in two parallel hells, circling each other without touching. She couldn't forgive him for controlling her. He couldn't forgive himself for wanting her so completely. The world moved on without them, cold and indifferent. But neither of them did. They stayed frozen, staring across an unbridgeable distance, wishing the other would take the first step. Months passed, and they tried to pretend they were strangers. Raphael built new walls of glass and steel around himself. He'd sit in meetings with his jaw clenched, barely hearing a word. His assistants learned to fear his silences more than his rage. He fired one for asking if he was okay. In those rare moments alone, he would pour a drink and stare at the city lights, wondering if she was seeing the same skyline, wondering if she hated him as much as he hated himself for letting her go. Camila learned how to lie. She told everyone she was fine, that leaving was the best thing she'd ever done. She started laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny, stayed out too late with men she didn't care about. She let them kiss her, let them touch her, but always pushed them away before it went too far. In the quiet of her tiny apartment, she would hold herself and shake, remembering the way he used to pin her wrists above her head and make her beg, remembering how safe she'd felt even when she hated him. He would catch himself reading old texts from her. She'd once sent him a photo of her lunch with the caption, "Is this healthy enough for you, tyrant?" And he had threatened to fire her if she ever ate so little again. He'd laughed at the time. Now it made him sick. He had memorized the timestamp. 12:48 p.m. on a Tuesday in June. He'd closed the biggest deal of his career that day, but it was the text he remembered. He wanted to delete it, but he couldn't make himself press the button. She still had the suit jacket he'd left in her hotel room. She told herself she'd sell it, or burn it, or at least shove it into the back of the closet. But it stayed on a chair, draped like he might come back for it. Sometimes she pressed her face into it, inhaling the last traces of his cologne. She would curse him, curse herself, and end up crying until her head hurt. She hated that he could reduce her to this. She'd once told him no one would ever break her. He'd only smiled like he knew better. He still paid her rent behind the scenes. She never knew. He threatened her landlord with lawsuits if he dared tell her. The man thought he was insane. Raphael didn't care. It felt like the only thing he could do for her without contaminating her life further. He told himself it wasn't love, it was duty, guilt. But on sleepless nights he imagined showing up at her door, telling her everything, falling to his knees if he had to. He imagined her slamming the door in his face. It was the only thing that kept him from trying. Sometimes they saw each other by accident. A corporate event she worked at as a temp. A gala he was forced to attend. Their eyes would meet across the room like magnets snapping together. The air between them would go heavy and hot. She would look away first, always. He would watch her go with that frozen mask on his face, heart beating like a war drum. She would excuse herself to the bathroom and vomit from the force of everything she refused to feel. One night, he watched her talking to another man. The guy was trying too hard, touching her arm, leaning in. She smiled politely, but her eyes were dead. Raphael's hands clenched around his glass, so hard it cracked. He made himself stay where he was, forcing the jealousy down his throat like bile. She deserved to be free. She deserved someone gentle. He told himself he was doing the right thing by staying away. But when he got home, he destroyed his own living room in a blind, red rage. Camila had moments of clarity when she saw it all for what it was, poison. They had devoured each other until there was nothing left to give. He had tried to own her. She had tried to fix him. Neither had worked. She told herself she was better now. But every time she repeated it, the words rang hollow. She'd given him the softest parts of herself, and he'd turned them to glass. But she'd cut him too, left scars on that guarded heart he tried so hard to bury. He'd once told her no one had ever made him feel small. She'd laughed in his face, calling him delusional. But later, in bed, she'd whispered, "I don't want to make you small. I want to make you real." He hadn't known what to say. He'd kissed her instead, like that could be an answer. Now he thought about those words every single day. He was real now. Real in his pain. Real in his loneliness. Real in the fact that he'd destroyed the one person who'd ever seen him clearly. She used to accuse him of being a coward. He'd bristle at the word, hiss insults back. But in the end, she'd been right. He couldn't face what he felt for her. He couldn't let go of the control long enough to admit he loved her. Now he thought about it like an equation he'd failed to solve. If he'd just said it once, just once, would she still be here? Or would it have only prolonged the inevitable? He would never know. The unspoken words festered like an infected wound. She got better at pretending. She found steadier work. She stopped crying every night. But she never stopped checking her phone before bed, just in case. She'd stare at her ceiling and imagine him lying somewhere just as sleepless, thinking of her. It was pathetic. It was human. When friends asked why she seemed so distant, she'd shrug and say she was tired. Which was true. She was exhausted from carrying around a love she wasn't allowed to want anymore. He bought her favorite wine for a meeting once without realizing it. His secretary caught it, swapped it out before she arrived. He'd scowled when she told him. "Don't ever mention her again," he'd snapped. But after everyone left, he'd picked up the bottle and turned it over in his hands for an hour. He'd almost opened it, almost poured a glass and toasted to her ghost. Instead, he smashed it in the sink, watching the red bleed down the drain like blood. They both dated other people. It never worked. She would tense at the slightest hint of possessiveness. He would recoil from any woman who showed real emotion. They carried the blueprint of their failure into every new connection, comparing, resenting, mourning. She'd flinch if anyone raised their voice. He'd shut down if anyone got too close. Neither would admit it, but they had ruined each other for anyone else. Sometimes he would draft emails to her at 3 a.m. rambling, pathetic apologies, promises to change, begging her to come back. He never sent them. He would wake the next morning and delete them all, pretending it hadn't happened. But his eyes were always bloodshot in the boardroom. Staff whispered that he was losing it. He didn't care. Let them think he was crazy. He was. He'd had sanity once and traded it for the memory of her skin against his. Camila tried therapy. She lasted 3 sessions. The therapist asked why she stayed so long in something so toxic. She couldn't answer without crying. She never went back. She told herself it was because it was too expensive. Really, it was because she couldn't stand hearing a stranger say it wasn't love. She knew it wasn't healthy. She knew it had hurt them both. But it had been real. And she was terrified she'd never feel anything that real again. He kept every gift she'd ever given him. A cheap pen, a keychain from a trip she'd taken, a tie she'd picked out and made him wear to an event. He kept them in a drawer he never opened, because seeing them made him want to rip his own heart out. But he couldn't throw them away. It was the one weakness he allowed himself. Proof that for a while, someone had loved him enough to try, even if he hadn't deserved it. She sometimes wrote him letters she never sent. Confessions, apologies, accusations. She would burn them in the sink after finishing, watching the ashes swirl down the drain. It was ritual, cleansing and cruel. But it helped her breathe, helped her hold her head up at work the next day, helped her keep saying I'm fine with enough conviction that even she started to believe it sometimes. They lived in the same city, haunted the same places. Every now and then they would see each other. No words, just eyes locking for a split second before one of them fled. Each time it happened, it left them raw and shaking for days. Friends noticed, coworkers noticed, but no one dared say anything. It was too obvious, too brutal. The truth was written on their faces every time they saw each other. I hate you. I want you. I'm sorry. He still dreamed of her. Sometimes the dreams were soft, her laughter in his ear, her fingers in his hair. Sometimes they were nightmares, her walking away while he begged. He would wake sweating, gasping, alone in that too-big bed he'd once offered to her like a throne. He had all the money, all the power, but none of it could buy her back. None of it could buy forgiveness, especially from himself. And so they continued, two ghosts drifting through their own lives, broken in different ways but by the same collision. He ruled an empire with blood on his hands. She built a quiet life with his fingerprints still on her soul. They told themselves it was over, that they'd moved on. But some nights, when the city was too quiet and the memories too loud, they both reached for their phones. And for a moment, they both wanted to say it. I'm sorry. I miss you. Come home.